Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Shelley Cohan, and I am thrilled and so excited to welcome Melissa Gonzalez to the podcast. You are principal of MG2, and I am thrilled because you are also, I'm going to say best-selling author. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that
Ah,
yet, but
thank
you
you.
are author of the book, The Purpose Pivot.
Yes.
So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me and for being at the launch night at Crate and Barrel. It meant so much that you were there. And I was just talking to somebody on my team. I'm like, FIT showed up big. Like there was like you had a nice group, you, Reggie, I mean so many people and it meant so much and especially too like we've recruited from FIT. So like past students that work for us got to see you guys there too. It was really nice.
It was great. And I have to say, what a book launch. Like, I got there a few minutes early because I just like to get to things early. So I got there a few minutes early. And I'm thinking, okay, they'll be like, I hope I can get in the store. And when I walked in there, the place was full. Like, your book launch, everyone was like, I can't believe how many people came. And it was fantastic, just the showing up. And of course, I love Crate and Barrel. And you may or may not know this, but Janet Hayes is one of my favorite all time leaders. I've written about her many times, and she was on
Oh.
Lead Like Her.
Oh, great. Yes. She really kind of, her and Ken Pilot made it happen. And it was I felt like the perfect backdrop for the association of home and coziness and well-being. And like, it just was the perfect setting. And they were so supportive. And, Alicia, the president of Crate and Barrel who works with Janet's already said like, let's get, Chicago on the calendar for Crate and Barrel Chicago, which is really exciting.
That's exciting. Invite me, please.
Yes,
I'd be
come
happy
for
to make a
sure.
trip.
Yes.
So, in your book, you really bring home the ideas of like this trust in your gut, embracing slow living, and personal growth. But if you don't mind, because our
Sure.
listeners may not know the reason why you wrote your book, if you could just kind of
Absolutely.
tell us why you wrote your book, The Pivot
Yes.
Purpose,
Yeah, the purpose pivot. Yes.
The Purpose
Um,
Pivot.
yes, it have. It's the double alliteration's easy to do that. So yes. So really the inspiration of me writing this book, I was like inspiration on many levels. The first was my own personal experience and after going a year plus of my body kind of sending me signals that I wasn't myself and increasing intensity. In the beginning, it was, you know, kind of subtle messaging. And then as we got to the end of 2023, it was louder messages, right? And so much so that I wrote down on a post-it note that I actually have here. I can I keep it. It's my reminder, I think. But it's also in the book. But I have this post-it note that I wrote. I was going to do this Better You challenge, and I was going to do it with my family. And it was after a year of kind of like not feeling myself, increasingly fatigued, um, longer durations of not being able to, have a bowel movement and things like that. Um, and I'm a high energy person, so for me to like not have energy to get up is definitely not me. So I wrote this down and I said, I'm going to do this challenge. We're going to do it, January 10th to the 31st. I'm going to focus on better gut health. I don't know how. I think maybe I need a cleanse. And fast forward January 10th, I got woken up out of my sleep in excruciating pain, and ended up having to be taken to the ER for this pain, and I felt like I was in full blown labor. And then that turned into, later that day ending up in emergency surgery because my intestines had twisted 365 degrees and were not going to twist back. And it was trapping my ability to my blood flow, um, basically I had not, when you're constipated for like a week and then that gets trapped, it's like pretty dangerous. And they told me, if that burst, you could go into septic shock, which is obviously like could be fatal. Your organs can stop working and things like that. And so it was a very scary time for me across the country from my family on a business trip. But it was also this like wake up call of, my body I knew I wasn't myself. So much so I wrote it down on a piece of paper and the world heard me. Like I put it out and the universe answered me on that day. For exactly what I felt was not right. And I felt that I can't ignore that, like for it to be so on the nose. And what am I going to do with that? message of like, I heard it and I wasn't really listening. And when I shared on my Instagram, I usually share like we did a store opening or we won awards or all this stuff. I shared, my year started out different. I missed NRF, all the things, and people said, I hope you're okay and I'm thinking of you, but so many also started to share their own personal stories of, um, their physical and mental well-being, things like cancer and stroke and adrenal failure and just a lot of different things that they hadn't told other people outside of, maybe their immediate family because they didn't want people to associate them having those situations with weakness and that they couldn't do their job and they couldn't. Um, and I thought this is terrible, right? This is when you need people the most. This is when you
Of
should,
course.
you know, you should never be embarrassed by those things and actually prioritizing them as strength, not weakness. And we have to change this message. And so I started drafting an outline, and so many women were open to sharing with me. And that's it became even more inspirational as I went down that journey and started to hear all these other stories as well.
That's amazing. And the book is fantastic. I love the way it's written. You tell the stories, you give advice, and there's some practical examples that people actually can use, worksheets and stuff. So, congratulations. I just love the
Thank you.
book, and it came for me at a very great time in my career, but you probably hear that from everybody.
Well, it's different, I wanted to have a lot of diversity in the book, and that's why I stuck with women because at first that's who was sharing the most. But to be honest, since I've posted on LinkedIn, which I kind of now have another realization of how different those audiences are, it's been a lot of men who have messaged me privately. But in the beginning, it was a lot of women, and I said, I want to have diversity in career paths, career trajectory. It's a lot of like senior leaders, but in different fields, some are professional artists, some are in film and TV, a lot are in retail, because that's my world. People are in financial services, and I wanted to have the opportunity where different stories are going to resonate with different people depending on where you're at in your life and what feels relatable. And, there's different age groups within that. And so the younger age, demographic that's starting to read it, it's resonating with them, but maybe differently, right? Because they haven't had some of these experiences that maybe you and I are like at a different place at, but it allows them maybe to get ahead of those experiences, like maybe they'll make different choices more proactively that we didn't make because they get to learn from women who are, further along in their career path.
Absolutely. So I'd love to ask you some specific questions from your book. Is that all right?
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right. So one of the questions is you talk about your gut kind of being your second brain. And so I
Hmm.
want to ask you, can you think of a specific business decision where you actually went with your intuition and not so much on, I know you're a data person. So can
Yeah.
you share a moment where you said, oh, I know what the data is telling me, but I'm going to go this other direction?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I'm always saying because, data needs context all the time, right? So that you can be grounded in it. And a lot of the time, I'm looking at quantitative data. And so it's that qualitative layer that I think where intuition kind of gets brought in. And, there's times that we'll get data that infer certain things are driving behavior. And I think sometimes I'll be like, well, I think that's maybe an outcome, but I'm not sure that that's the why. I don't know if that's the driver. And I feel like that's sometimes where like the intuition might kick in because it's assessing a little bit of a more from the behavioral sides of the why. And I think you need to complement both sides of that, over time, I think you just develop more of that because you've seen more, you've experienced more, these triggers kind of start to kick in like, okay, when that happened last time, I know this happened last time. And it's not that you want to have a bias, right, or ever shut down an idea because of it. But again, you'll have these gut intuitions based on life experiences. So I think over time, you don't want to ignore that or at least you might want to pause and double check it. And I write in the book about non-work related ways that I think we can all personally say, oh yeah, I felt that. Like there's been times in my life where I felt a little jittery that morning, or like something was just off, or I was like dropping things more than I should. And I was just like, my center is off right now. I don't know. And I'm not like a superstitious person, but in those instances, things would have happened that day that were like a little off. And it was like something about me knew that something was just off kilter. So I think, and I think also we remember negative things more than positive,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
So
So I
does our
think
body.
so does that, right? And so some of that intuition is that our innate ability to protect ourselves too. Like this has happened before. I recognize this. Like let me pause first and like make sure I'm going down the right path or making the right decision. And you don't want that to hinder you, but it's good to allow yourself the ability to pause when it happens to just again gut check. What is that messaging saying to me? And should I be doing something with that?
That's so interesting because in the past year for myself, I have, like, in the past, I never would have done this. But now, exactly what you just said, I wake up on a day and something's off. I can't tell you what something's off. I can't tell you why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. But in my ride to work or my commute, I'm thinking to myself, something's not right with me today. I have to get centered. I have to,
Hmm.
slow down. So I think recognizing when it's happening and actually giving yourself a little credit for, saying, hey, something's off, something's not right. So I,
Yeah.
I think that's great to talk about it because I think women, mostly, I do a lot of leadership women things, and I think a lot of women push it aside, push it away because we have to be strong every single day.
Yes.
We have to show up 100% every single day.
I think there's, the more I talk about this, the more people share things with me. So I can't cite the exact report, but I had a friend over and he said to me, I was reading this piece and it talked about as women, you know, because of what our body changes, what we go through from like being a girl and getting our period and cramping, and then, then you have a child maybe, and then you have perimenopause, and we're constantly like dealing with stuff. So it creates this like I can power through it kind of mentality. And no offense to men that are watching, but that's why we handle being sick better. Because because we're like
It's
more
true.
used to that, happening. And he said that to me. I'm like, it is true, but we shouldn't think that that's the only way that we can wear a badge of honor. Like,
Yeah.
right? And I think that we have to change that perception even within ourselves. Like I can now say I wear a little bit of a badge of honor that I know when to tap out. I know like, when this is not my place of impact, when I know I need rest, and we need to um embrace that, like those are admirable things too, not always just powering through for to say I can power through.
I want to follow up on something you just said. So, our vice president of academic affairs at Fashion Institute of Technology was at your book launch, and she's still thanking me today for bringing her.
Oh.
And she just was amazed at you, your book, what you're doing. But one of the questions she had was you mentioned impact, and you said
Mhm.
something about, tapping out because of the impact. Can you tell me a little bit about, what's this impact, and how do you discover your biggest impact? I think that's the
Yeah.
general premise of that chapter, right?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of different ways I think that you could figure that out, and also embrace that it will evolve, right? Because what that looks like in the early parts of your career to the midpoint of your career to the, like, retirement and to sitting on boards or whatever you end up doing, that will evolve, right? Because your life experiences will shape those things. But there's a number of things I think that you can do. There's those assessment tests for sure that I think are informative just in even your styles, right? Like those personality index tests or the Bring Myers and stuff like that. So me taking those, there's trends in that. Like on the PI test, I'm a captain, which most people will be like, yeah. And then in the other, I tend I score really high on futurists of spectrum. So I'm forward thinking, big picture. And so I've taken a couple of those where there's constant theme in that. So my superpower isn't necessarily being in the weeds, like in the details and the analysis of everything. I can I can exist in those conversations. I could do it, but it's not my highest contribution. My highest contribution is more the pulled back, bigger picture, future forward view. And in organizations, you need mixes of those things, right? You need those tensions. You need the person who can think 5 years out, and you need the person who could be like, well, here's where we're today and here's where we're optimizing where we are today too. And so if you and the people around you have a better understanding of what those things are, then you could figure out like what are your complements, right? And not everybody should be doing the same exact thing. And if everybody is the same composition, then I think you hinder growth too. So it's a little bit of, I think, of a learning over time. And then in the book, there's a section called your delegation list. And so some of the things you could start to test in addition to like actually taking a test is, take stock of your day, of your week, of your month. What energizes you? Like if you think about the things that you're doing in your day, professionally, personally, what energizes you? What gives you those dopamine fixes? So you feel super high energy in a good way. And what are the things that are like my cortisol levels are like probably not where they should be, and it doesn't like I feel depleted. Um, and that's the first step that you can kind of take in those lists. And you start to look at those things that you feel depleted on, you're like, is this something I should delegate? And if you're not sure, then you could take the second look and say, is this my superpower or is it not? Right. And I think like I said, your superpower evolves, but if it's not your superpower and it depletes you, then you should ask again, should I delegate it? And if you're not delegating it, then you need to ask yourself, well, do I trust people? Like, do I have trust issues? Do I not have the right team? Do I need to
Right.
coach? And I think as you slowly take those steps, pick one thing, right? Because one of the other prompts I did recently at a workshop, and I might have done it that night, was like, if there's one thing you could take off your calendar with no consequences, what would that be? And think about those things, because as you do it incrementally, you start to realize what you open up space for. And you also are going to let somebody else maybe do something that they're really good at that really excites them. Like, my husband, and we also work at the same firm, but he loves spreadsheets, and I could deal with a spreadsheet. I have a finance background, but like, I'm not getting excited about it, and he geeks out and I'm like, you do that spreadsheet, and I love creative meetings, right? And that's our yin and yang. But that's how we push the group forward too, because we're bringing such different perspectives in.
I love that. And I think you're right. Like I do strength finders. I've done the Myers-Briggs and a bunch of other
Mm,
ones. And I've done strength finders like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. I get the same results every time. So I do think there's some merit to people really understanding what their strengths are and what their skill
mm,
sets are. But I want to ask you, we're in a very fast paced environment. We are in
yes.
retail, it is high pressure, it's on 100%, it's go, go, go. And you talk a lot about the power of pause and you talk
Hmm.
about normalizing slow. How do we do
Hmm.
that in our industry? How do you do? I mean, you're leading a company, you founded a company, you sit on boards. Like, how are you? Like, how does that make sense in our crazy retail industry?
Yeah, I think it is embracing that other part of the conversation, right? And it's how you're intersecting with those things. When you sit on a board, you should have an intentional arrangement of what does your commitment look like, and that should be the lens of like, where am I delivering impact, right? I'm not gonna be on with the phone with them every day. What is that once a quarter commitment, look like? If we're gonna get a 1 hour call on, like, what are the key items of that agenda? I mean, being really organized and intentional with your time is an important aspect of it. And I think that keeps you out of the busyness, right? Because a lot of the times you feel like if I'm fully booked, I'm busy, I'm productive and I'm making impact. And then you go back to the end of the day and your to-do list, you're like, I've checked off nothing that I said I was going to do. And it feels never ending. And so, I think each time I've made a decision, like I'm going to take on something, I'm going to write a book, right? But I'm still a principal at my firm, and we just went through another acquisition and I have a, pretty significant, like major project I'm working on through that with them. And so I've had to have very intentional conversations with leadership and my peers and say, like, this is what's happening, where's most important for my time to be. We have other leadership. What should sit on their plate now? And you're going to have like those active dialogues too, and be okay with it. And it's not always easy. Like, I step out of things sometimes and I get FOMO, you know, I'm like, oh, I'm not invited to that meeting anymore. Like, what are they talking about? And then I have to say to myself, you don't need to know. You can get the summary, right? It doesn't mean that like I'm iced out or any of those things. This is just like what I'm evolving to, what I'm shifting to. And I think you just it's a practice really, right? Because I'm not going to say you just flip a switch and you just like I don't care about those things anymore and you're just out of it. But I'm trying to remind myself if I don't do that, A, they don't get to do the role they got brought in for.
Right.
And B, I don't get to do these other things that I'm really excited and want to be able to grow into. And so the last part of the book, I do talk about that parallel path of growth and shedding. And those those two things kind of have to coexist in order for you to grow.
I love that. And I have to say, in reading your book, you can really feel it's such a genuine journey. And you read these people's stories, you read your story, and it's just really heartfelt. And I do think the whole idea of being transparent is sometimes difficult, as you
Mhm.
mentioned, being able to come out and say, hey, look, I can't be everywhere all. So being transparent about where you're at, where you can be, I think that's great. I think it's important for us to be more transparent. So you also mentioned in your book being where you're supposed to be. Tell
Mhm.
me what is that?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into that whole world of FOMO and like, you know, we're on socials and, you know, you look at mine this week, launch week, right? It probably looks like I have like the most amazing life or whatever. But, you know, a lot of work went into that. And not everything worked out perfectly along that process. And, you know, there were things that are moving targets all the time when you launch a book and you're having a book tour and all those things. And I'm not sharing every single one of those, right? I'm sharing like the successes more so. But I think it's remembering that, you know, there's going to be a little give and take in those things. So for example, you know, there was one big like national media thing that I was like, oh, that'll happen on launch day, you know? And I had great media, but not this one, for example. And when I first got the email, like, hey, it's just not going to work out, but are you open to another time? Like, I felt so like crushed in the moment. And then I stopped and I reminded myself, the success of this launch, the success of this journey, the success of the bigger picture I want this to be, which is the messaging of it, is not contingent on if I was on that day on that one show. And so it could feel like this catastrophic thing that happens, but I was like, this is just not the timing for it. Maybe it's going to happen next month, or maybe I'm going to end up on another show, or maybe something else, you know, and it's just having um, like faith in that, you know, that not there's it's very unlikely that one thing that doesn't work out exactly the way you saw it is going to make or break the success of the bigger picture goal that you have at that time.
I think that's great. And I also love at the end of the book, not to give away everything in your book, but I love, because you mentioned it, I'm going to bring it up, the shedding piece. I mean, to me, like when you talk about, shedding, and of course, I think of my Tamascan dog who sheds, it's a lab Tamascan and shedding all the time. And I think about, wouldn't it be great just to shed off the things that we don't need? It's so important. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that continually over time.
Well, I think we don't think about it. And I think that it's really hard to embrace that it's a healthy thing to do. And in that chapter, I talk about different levels, right? There's different levels of shedding. There's like decluttering, right? That's like more basic level of like materialistic things. Like we all need to declutter our closet, right? Or, you know, your calendar is another level, right? Like you can start looking at those things. And then there's relationships and then there's different things. And it doesn't mean that those things didn't have importance at one point. It doesn't mean you can't honor the role they had when at those times that it made a lot of sense. Um, but yeah, it's kind of taking that self-care view of if I don't do these things, it's at what cost that I don't allow myself to get to something else.
Well, Melissa, it has been an absolute pleasure. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I hope that, you know, there's a story or two that resonates as you mentioned, Shelley, it's not just my story. It's dozens of women who trusted me enough to share their stories, many of them for the first time. And the hope is just you find a story or two that resonates with you, and you find a lesson or two that you can, start to embrace a bit, and you share it with somebody else. And really, I just hope that it helps people embrace the mindset that through vulnerability and intuition, you do open a lot possibilities for yourself, and that your well-being should not be a side project on your path to leadership or throughout your career growth.
I love that, Melissa. And I'm going to end with something I want to do that you probably won't do, and that is
Okay.
encourage everyone to go out and buy The Purpose Pivot. Run, don't walk. It's an amazing book and it's an amazing journey. So thank you, Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.